It has been far from the ideal start to Paul George's Philadelphia 76ers tenure, and things are only getting worse. The star forward has found himself on the injury report once again with the same exact injury, suffering another left knee hyperextension. I want to break down what we know on the situation regarding the update from Shams Charania and the Sixers specifically, as well as a couple other things that Paul George has done that may not be sitting exactly right with the fans here. But let's start it exactly off with this initial report from Shams Charania saying that Philadelphia 76ers star Paul George has a bone bruise in his left knee and is listed as out for the next 2 games. He will be reevaluated on Monday. Now, to get exactly what has been said from the Sixers angle here, we do have these reports. Shout out to Breland Moore here tweeting from the Sixers. An MRI of Paul George's left knee revealed no structural damage. He'll be listed as out, left knee bone bruise for the next 2 games and reevaluated on Monday. Now, why I think that timeline is important, they play the Clippers 2 games from now, so he's clearly going to miss that game, and I do think that's why the Sixers specified. But to be perfectly honest, I think it's an incredibly optimistic view for how quickly he will be back on the floor, especially factoring that this is the second time that the same exact injury happened. I do not see this rapid turnaround rate where Paul George is just going to be on the floor after 2 games. This to me feels like at the minimum probably a couple weeks. And to play exactly what happened here, I am going to pull up the video. This is a slow motion video. You can see this is a pretty good angle of it. I had to search and find this one, but you can see exactly how he comes down. He's going up for a rebound here. It is Desmond Bane that he's competing with, and you can see that left knee just snap back in the exact same way that was the case just a couple weeks ago back in preseason. You can see on his face his frustration right away. I do have sympathy for Paul George. I understand the injury concerns are legitimate and something that have been with him really throughout the duration of his career. But obviously, there's not much you can do about that. I have a hard time holding that against this guy. This is not an issue of him being out of shape or not having his body up to speed or anything like this. This is 2 unfortunate freak accidents, but the Sixers still have to deal with the repercussions here. Now, as far as Paul George as a whole, the Paul George show has not stopped whatsoever. Podcast P is still off to the races and running, and ran with this as a headline today for the show, saying with the thumbnail that players only meeting leak, what's next for the Sixers, featuring Reggie Jackson. With the title exactly, Paul George gets real on the players only meeting leak, Sixers struggles, and more. Now, for full hand up and clarity here, I have not listened to this podcast, so I cannot say specifically what Paul George did or did not say. I will listen to it soon. Curiosity is going to get the best of me, and I'll either be more fired up or give him a little bit of pass here. I'll reserve my full judgment for that. But what I will say for this is for a guy that, by every measurement, has underperformed so far on the court, that he's missed more time than he's played for this team, it just doesn't quite sit right with me, especially on the heels of Joel Embiid going out of his way to be upset about there being a leak. It's very funny to me that the conversation is essentially Joel Embiid being mad that there's a leak. Paul George, I don't know how anybody leaked this players-only meeting. So anyway, let's get into it on the podcast. It's very funny to me that is kind of the transition there. Now, in fairness to Paul, I do think he does a pretty good job on the podcast. I think he's very articulate, well-spoken, good storyteller, and that there is some good stuff in there. I'm not as much of a hater on that in general. I'm a part of the content game myself, so game recognized game as far as him jumping on the opportunity here, but maybe not the best of time considering all the other factors that has gone into it. But once again, did not listen to it all the way through myself. But we did have one interesting quote here from the podcast that I did want to pull up. Shout out to Legion Hoops for transcribing it, although they are pretty consistent Sixers haters, so not too much of a shout out here. But it says, Paul George on the 76ers 2-12 start. We really got to get our shit together. Jared McCain can't be our most consistent player. And it is funny that he says that, because I did want to compare the two directly. Obviously, 2 new faces on this Sixers team. There's been a lot of roster turnover. But if you had asked me or told me a couple weeks ago that Jared McCain would be outplaying Paul George in a Sixers uniform, I would have thought you were absolutely insane. And I think it explains a lot about the situation that we're in right now. So to pull up their stats exactly, first I want to start with Paul George, who across the games that he has played in, which unfortunately have been far and in between, he's averaged 14.9 points, 5.4 rebounds, 4.8 assists, shooting 38.3% from the field, 27.8% from beyond the three-point line. Both those shooting splits would be career lows for the 9-time All-Star. Now, compare that directly to Jared McCain here. We're talking about 15.6 points per game, 2.7 assists, 2.1 rebounds, shooting 47.5% from the field, and 41% from three. Shout out to Jared McCain, man. He truly has been the biggest bright spot on an otherwise depressing Sixers season, and that is something that's given me a little bit of life moving forward. it's very exciting to see Jared McCain kind of getting the recognition he deserves, the rightful Rookie of the Year favorite, and there is a lot of season left to be played, but this is something that changes the picture both in the short and the long term for the Sixers team. In the short term here, I now think the conversation shifts for how you stagger minutes to not just the big three when this team is fully healthy, which, by the way, who knows how often we even see that, because at this point of the season, 14 games into the season as they sit at 2-12, we've seen a grand total of 6 minutes of basketball with Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid on the floor. That is so frustrating, so snake-bitten, and just straight up Sixers stuff right there. But how this changes that conversation is this is not just staggering minutes between those three. Jared McCain is every bit that part of the conversation, and I personally feel, at least in the short term, as every game is essentially a must-win, as we're looking at the standings of the Sixers with a 2-12 record, dead last across the entire NBA. Every game must be approached as a must-win at this point. I think you have to have 2 of the 4 on the floor at all times, and those 4 meaning Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Jared McCain. All 4 of those guys are capable of producing offense at a level that really only McCain has shown so far this season. We did get a 35-point performance from Joel Embiid against the Grizzlies, so some strides forward in that direction to him looking like the true version of himself. But in reality, it is about this whole team finding its peak, and we're pretty far away from that. Before McCain, shout out to him. That is something that I do give him a ton of credit for stepping into the spotlight. But this is about Paul George underperforming at the heart of things. We now have a couple days to wait until we get him back on the floor. Now, in fairness to Paul George, he's not in the top 5 reasons for why the Sixers have underperformed this year. It's kind of sad that that is the case, that we're sitting at 2-12 and your $50 million man really is not one of the driving reasons why, that we are talking about a guy who is only averaging this many points per game, that we're only talking about 14.9 points per game, shooting 27.8% from 3. It's an absolute underperformance for what the bar of expectations is, but you did not pay Paul George for this short term. We still got to talk about. This is a 4-year contract. There's still plenty more games to play. And in defense of Paul a little bit here, we've seen 2 total games without him on a minutes limit. The minutes limits are driving me crazy, by the way. I don't understand it by any means. Tyrese Maxey last night against the Grizzlies was able to play 5 minutes in the first half due to a minutes restriction. What is the point of him being cleared to play if he can only give you 5 minutes? And for what it's worth, he looked absolutely fine. He looked like himself out there. He played like Tyrese Maxey. Now in the second half, he got a little bit more expanded opportunity, but I don't get this super, being tentative with guys, and it's clearly not worked. As with Paul George specifically after this minutes limit, we're getting this exact play happening just a couple weeks later. The exact same motion here. Now, for this with Paul George, to bring it back to the injury as a whole here, there is a larger conversation to be had. Guys do not get more healthy as they get older. This dude already being 35 years old, already having a notable injury track record building up. This is a huge concern this is happening at this early in the season. This is something that the Sixers are fighting themselves at both ends as they clearly need to win games now, but also have to make sure this guy's ready if you do get a crack at the postseason. And as I mentioned, there's 3 more seasons on the books after this. This is looking like a disaster of a season. This only reinforces things, and hopefully that there is some truth to everything the Sixers are saying, that this is just a short-term 2-game absence, even lesser of an injury than was the case the first time, but I would expect them to operate rather cautiously, factoring that this is the exact same injury that we saw in preseason. Ultimately, I'm going to rest easy thinking this is pretty good news. The fact that there is no structural damage by any means here, that this is the report that we have saying that everything has checked out okay, that is a huge sigh of relief to me. When it happened, and especially when Nick Nurse thought that he was fine last night, I was thinking that there was no world in which we see Paul George in the short-term future. It does seem like that at least remains a possibility for now, so we will take those as it goes. So shout out to Paul George for not getting severely hurt. I'll give him a little bit of credit there, but obviously he's got a long ways to go to earning the level on this team that is expected, for him performing to the standard that is expected after he signed on the dotted lines this summer. It has not been a smooth transition so far. Again, he is not at the forefront of reasons why this team is struggling right now, but still a part of the equation overall. So we'll see how things shake out from here. Hopefully a speedy recovery and a better version of Paul George when he returns, but we'll keep taking the punches as Sixers fans right now, and be ready when the moment finally begins to turn around. Not a lot of time. Need to see a sense of urgency. So let's move on forward here. Appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in this video. As always, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button and dropping a like if you have not already. Have any comments, type them away below. I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.